Hello my dear friends, how are you? Welcome. Thank you for joining me here today. I'm Valhyr and today I'm here to give an introduction to the origins of Halloween. A series of videos introducing a couple of subjects that, put together, eventually gave origins to several themes we see reflected on such a spooky season. Well, as is tradition in this channel, every year during October I always deliver videos that more or less go in line with the mood of this month. Subjects concerning witchcraft, magic, the occult, a little bit of some devilry here and there. And, well, it is no exception this year, and here we are. By the way, speaking of this season and the overall mood hanging in the air, I'm about to release a new EP with my experimental solo music project called VAR. The EP will be called Ritual, and it is indeed what many of you have asked for. A work to be used during your rituals, meditation, and other spiritual endeavors. It will soon come out, right? I remind you that VAR is on over 20 streaming music platforms, including on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, and such. But my music project always comes out first at Bandcamp, where you can buy the digital copy of every work that has come out thus far. There's also a YouTube channel and Instagram just for VAR, where you can get a lot of information about this project. But more about it in the description of this video, right? Now that I have tried to sell my bread, I am my own advertiser. Well, let's delve in straight into today's subject. Thank you for your time, if you please. As I said here many times before, there are several misconceptions concerning Halloween and its origins. What we call Halloween today is a relatively modern phenomenon. However, there are quite a bit of ancestral origins to it, blend together to give us the several traditions which are often included within the Halloween festivity. Many of us have heard, surely, that its origins comes from the Irish Summer's End Samhain, or the Welsh Nos Gaeilge, Winter's Eve, perhaps the Scandinavian Veturnatur, Winter's Night, or Winter Nights, and the Anglo-Saxon Blood Month, and so on and so forth. Well, yes and no. Its origins doesn't come from one single cultural tradition, but a mixture of many different cultural and traditional influences, right? Ancient festivals that took place at summer's end and gave rise to customs and rituals we somewhat still perform today. Of course, albeit many things have changed, but more or less we still perform on the night of the 31st of October. No doubt that many of the ancient origins of what today we call Halloween come from a number of, let's say, pre-Christian European practices that would mark the end of summer, and thus such practices and rituals would take place between October and November. As spoken here before, such practices and rituals were expressed in yearly cyclical festivities at moments of great change of the natural seasons, which has a considerable impact on both the natural landscape itself and within the agrarian animistic perception towards the natural world and how it affects the means of production and reproduction and gathering and harvesting of resources essential to the human survival. So cyclical changes that require the creation, establishment and or re-establishment of relationships with the persons and forces that were responsible for the survival of human communities, precisely through beneficial relationships. As such, and such yearly animistic rituals and ceremonies during the end of a season were crucial to reinforce and maintain the interrelationships between and amongst human communities and the land. So, one of such festivities that has had a considerable impact on the eventual formation of the modern Halloween is, of course, the Gaelic Samhain, which is often thought to have originated with the Celts of Iron Age Britain, or, in other words, earlier continental Celtic traditions that have eventually reached Iron Age Britain and had a considerable cultural impact on the native populations. Of course, according to the Irish sagas, Samhain was an important harvest festival marking the beginning of winter as well as the end of the harvest season, or in other words, the threshold betwixt and between at that moment when it was necessary to have the proper rituals and ceremonies to celebrate with all those who made it possible the development of means of survival, and let's say to lay the foundations of animistic relationships to continue to ensure the survival through the colder months until the next celebration of rebuilding and re-establishing the relationships that will provide the necessary means of survival through the growth of everything that ensured human survival, and that would be the season of Beltane, which celebrated new life and fertility, while Samhain is more concerned with the end of certain relationships between the human communities and land, as well as concerned with death and a moment of pause reflected in the cognitive landscape. Although being the end of harvesting and a time to cull livestock, it also marks a season of plenty, of a great quantity of fresh meat and large quantities of grain, vegetables and fruit, which is best for your health, which, well, permitted the human communities to hold great feasts at given moments of celebration of life through the seasonal endeavors to survive death until the months of fertility and life would come again. Almost a poetic push through death, through darkness, to rise again on the other side, full of life. So between Samhain and Beltane, and well, almost poetic if were it not for the real harsh struggles through winter's deathly grasp. Still, Samhain also marks a moment of celebration to enjoy the fruits of a successful harvesting season, which in an animistic agrarian perspective, such a celebration is important to give thanks to all the persons and forces responsible for the successful harvest. Well, the celebration of land connectedness, right? And, well, no celebration is truly possible without great fires. Bright fires to bring the light as a symbolism of light upon the seemingly never-ending night as darkness began to lurk and glide towards the midwinter solstice until it finally sinks in. As it is a moment of pause and such an opposition to the previous months that are often focused on life and fertility within the agrarian animistic perception, perhaps it is small wonder that from Samhain onwards, it is a moment of reflection upon one's mortality and looking at the changes within the natural landscape. Well, it is a moment of deep slumber and death. A moment of duality, right? Celebrating life whilst death is at one's doorstep, and at the same time celebrating death as an existing reality the human community has no power over, but the survival of death means a new cycle of life and fertility. And this duality is still quite noticeable in the modern Halloween. The moment between life and death, where the two forces come together, and the struggle to hold the balance. So modern Halloween presents the themes of death and of life, the more negative yet somewhat magical aspects of death, as well as the need to celebrate and express life as an opposing force that is used as a manifestation of growth, activity, liveliness, enthusiasm, energy, and vitality of the human communities, and to maintain such a force, such a spirit and essence to be brought anew when life and fertility return into the world. So this is let's say, the more colorful nature of modern Halloween with a pagan essence to it, mostly of Irish Gaelic tradition, but not just. However, the etymology of Halloween is actually Christian in origin, right? By the 7th century, Catholicism had already spread throughout the great majority of Europe, and it was no exception in Ireland. Although, unlike what is often crafted as history's common knowledge, but it's so repeatedly history's misconceptions and propaganda, not just in relation to early Catholicism and Christianization of Europe, but also in relation to the Christianization of Ireland itself, the Catholic Church used a very well elaborated syncretism in order to eventually achieve Christianization of pagan peoples. So many pagan celebrations were still allowed, right, even within the grounds of the church, especially there, so that the population would get used to the presence of the church and became customary to the celebration of the festivities within the grounds of the church and with the presence of the new faith. There were several means of syncretism, obviously, many of which conducted by pagans themselves, actually bringing Christianity into their own midst, because that's how paganism worked in a nutshell, of course. The appreciation of different religious aspects and belief systems that could be incorporated into the already existing religious conceptions and beliefs. And the church, did a pretty good job as well by the progressive replacement of pagan deities with with Christian saints and biblical figures as well, pointing out the similarities between beliefs and conceptions, as well as well-elaborated syncretism that would bring together pagan and Christian myths, as well as a very successful swapping of seasonal celebrations with Christian alternatives. Early Catholicism, not that early actually, as it was for at least almost 1,000 years, followed the same pagan Roman formula of the empire when dealing with different cultures, religions, faiths, and belief systems of others, which was progressively incorporating such beliefs into the emperor's cult, as well as syncretism of Roman deities with indigenous gods and goddesses and all manner of spirit entities. So the Catholic Church followed the same scheme, the same pattern, and much of the success of Christianization wasn't just brought by missionaries, but also by pagans. The appreciation of pagans had towards the new faith and its iconography, symbolisms, conceptions, myths, and beliefs. Where the Roman Empire has failed, Catholicism succeeded. People learn from their own past mistakes eventually. A very good example of this is actually, since we are talking about Halloween, is precisely the swapping of this seasonal celebration to something more under the Catholic religious theme, right? In the early 7th century, Christians successfully converted the pagan temple to the Pantheon in Rome to the Santa Maria Rotuna, and replaced the Roman festival of the dead, Lemuria, held on the 13th of May for the new day of honoring the saints. So the feast of the martyrs, right? In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III moved this feast to the 1st of November, the same date as Samhain, and renamed it All Saints' Day. By the 10th century, All Souls' Day was added, a day of remembrance for those departed, while the feasting and sacrificial elements of Samhain became entwined with the Christian festival of Martinmas, held on the 11th of November. This, of course, in the British Isles, particularly in Ireland and in Scotland, was celebrated under the Christian religious calendar, of course, but the old folklore and myths somewhat remained, creating this mixture between a celebration of the dead and the saints with fae folk and other spirit entities, especially under the guise of Samhain, in Scotland and Nos Gaelan Gaith in Wales, Swin in the Isle of Man, and Caelan Gaith in Cornwall. The pagan and medieval folklore related to this time in between Samhain and Beltane is one of the great themes of Halloween. The idea that in this season there's a shift, the barrier between worlds could be breached, and all manner of spiritual entities and supernatural and spirits of all sorts could enter the mortal realm, especially mischievous entities such as the Fae folk or the fairy folk. So food was left outside as offerings to avoid being tricked or to suffer the mischievous actions of such spirits. So this was once part of the same animistic rituals and ceremonies spoken earlier, right? In times of great change within an animistic mentality, of course, the importance of creating beneficial relationships with the entities that inhabit the land is crucial for the survival of the human community to maintain these relationships of mutual aid. However, not all spirit entities, or rather not all other than human persons, are willing to create beneficial relationships. And precisely in times of change, great change, the world gets more chaotic, nature gets more chaotic, and certain entities have to be bargained with, hence some offerings to please or appease them, which is part of the animistic rituals of survival and to minimize danger, harm, and death. Well, please do watch my videos on animism, right? Well, suffice it to say that between Samhain and Beltane, it is a season of change, a walk through death and slumber. So there was this perception that the land is governed by spirits that, unlike in the months of planting and harvesting, which are seasons governed by fertility powers and spirits of life, during winter time there's this very real sense of death and other than human persons responsible for putting the land to sleep, and they bring about death-related forces. So the animistic rituals at this period are very much concerned with maintaining a relationship or several relationships of respect with such entities in order to avoid the more harmful aspects brought by nature and by the nature of such entities and by the season itself. So this is maintained in folklore, right? Folklore in the sense of oral traditions that somewhat maintain the essence of animistic rituals, ceremonies, and traditional customs, right? As such, folklore, as a strong factor of collective identity, survives through its adaptation to the new religious, political, economic, and social changes of a given society and culture, and that survival of folklore often depends on clinging on to the existing means of an authority and ruling power to convey its function, capacity, and power to those it rules and governs, and those means are often expressed through yearly and cyclical moments of festivity and celebration. Hence, such folklore lingers on in the celebrations held throughout the year. And for this particular case, the ancient animistic relationships with land spirits of winter season survive through folklore, which in turn is expressed in the Christian celebration of All Hallows Eve and All Souls Day, which brings about these Halloween themes related to all manner of spirit entities concerned with death and such other aspects of life that express the struggle of past human societies during such a season. So, for instance, the souls of the dead revisit their families and old households, which reflects the animistic celebration towards the ancestors during a time of pause and slumber, and turned inwards to the domestic life, to the familiar space, and a call for strength from ancestral beneficial entities. Thus, well mixed with the Christian celebration of All Saints and the dead, reporting back to the pagan Roman celebration of the dead, right? Furthermore, Samhain was a great time for divination, like all moments of change, like all moments in the year when there's this perception of a shift, a moment in between. These were great times to perform divination, especially taking into consideration the earliest definition of necromancy, which was augury, divination through the spirits of the departed, which makes Samhain a perfect time for that, for such an activity. So all these animistic beliefs, myths, celebrations, rituals, ceremonies, and other activities, their essence clings on to what eventually gave origins to Halloween, the modern Halloween. And speaking of divination, this is one of the reasons why the atmosphere of magic and the occult is also present in the conception of the Halloween, which then much later, right, during the 15th century, it's when the figure of the witch also starts to make an appearance in the overall theme of Halloween. By the early 15th century, with the religious clash between Catholicism and Protestantism, the great witch hunts began, spreading fear and terror throughout communities all across Europe, creating new folklore about witches and witchcraft, and eventually also about the devil. Witches gathering around and either joining with their goddess Diana or with the devil itself during their Sabbaths, one of which being the notorious night of Halloween. Old and new folklore get pretty well mixed together throughout the 15th century, further enriching the whole theme of Halloween. So it's actually only in the late 15th century that Halloween starts to be associated with witchcraft and witches. This is important to say because there's always that idea that Halloween has its origins in pagan witchcraft, more under the romantic sense of being associated with ancient, benevolent pagan rituals of fertility, and that it was the church that demonized it by calling such actions as witchcraft, which, mind you, no doubt the Christian faith, most especially Protestant currents, but not just, have indeed demonized quite a lot. However, the association between witchcraft and Halloween is a much later conception, sprouting in the modern period with the witch hunts and trials, most especially in the late 16th century in the height of the witch craze. So it's during this period, progressively taking its first steps or being shaped by the 11th century already and onwards, but taking uncontrollable proportions during the religious wars on religion itself and the witchcraft craze, that the surviving folklore themes start to be demonized. The animistic beliefs, pagan myths, and celebrations that have inspired numerous folk customs that later became integral to the celebration of Halloween were eventually twisted by the fear and hatred fomented by the religious wars. As such, the church branded fairies and supernatural beings and other entities of all sorts as evil, satanic creatures. So the once mischievous beings of the animistic worldviews became instead demonic creatures of Christian folklore, myth, and religious conceptions. Thus, Samhain became a night of demons and to be feared as well, eventually this new folklore finding its way into Halloween as well. So this is exactly what also gives rise to the devil of traditional folk magic, right? As ancient figures of initiation into the magical arts that have gained this new name and became the devil. So actually nothing to do with the Christian devil, and certainly not the same thing as Satan, let alone Lucifer, as some people think, but such as what happened to fairies and other beings, the figure of initiation into the old craft also became branded as the devil. Which is curious because this didn't actually stop these old customs from existing. It just made them survive longer through the new folklore. At some point, if old pagans could have seen all these developments, I'm sure they would have said, oh wow, how the fuck did we get here? But anyway, as if it weren't enough, the 14th century caught Europe by surprise with the Black Death. On top of all the festering chaos of the religious tension that was starting to take shape, and medieval Europe was utterly consumed by the obsession with images of death, along with ghosts of the past, and really religious fear, apocalyptic themes, the anthropomorphization of death through the imagery of skeletal grim reapers. I mean, the Black Death obviously had a great effect on the European medieval society as a whole due to its exceptionally high death count, giving rise to images of death in great quantity in art and folklore, becoming images of mainstream culture. And this whole imagery created to express this pandemic was soon followed by the witch craze, and it all entered the Halloween theme. I mean, the end of the European Middle Ages and the beginning of its modern period, those were indeed crazy years to live at. It was like finding out Santa Claus is actually your divorced uncle who runs a meth lab in your own basement, and you only find out about all of this because the lab eventually exploded and you come from school to find out you no longer have a home due to your uncle's activity, and due to the explosion it actually revealed a hole in the wall where old movies of your grandmother in the porn industry were kept, doing the muffin smashing with her own cousin, which is actually your great-grandfather, a former slave owner. Like, wow, that's too much information. Please stop. The point here, those were crazy times. So there were a lot of myths and new folklore put together, and Black Death and the witch craze was associated with the season due to the myths of Halloween. And all this European madness, because that's how we roll around here, eventually found its way into America, following the Irish immigration, right? When a large number of Scottish people migrated to Canada, and Irish people into the United States, following the potato famine of the 1800s. They took with them their folk traditions and the various traditions associated with Samhain and All Hallows, as well as the Christian celebrations, along with ghostly superstitions and the celebratory traditions associated with such a festivity, right? When Gaelic nations immigrated en masse to the New World in the 19th century, they took their Catholic beliefs, obviously, and somewhat also their ancestors' beliefs, obviously changed by time, religion, and cultural shifts of what once was Samhain, mixed together to form the Halloween night traditions and customs that had been handed down for centuries through the generations. Eventually, this gained a whole new proportions and the new conceptions and even new folklore in North America, when then Halloween was quite the curiosity for the North American peoples, being something quite outlandish brought by European immigrants, a celebration full of colorful costumes, dancing, reciting poetry, fireside games, fortune-telling, and this gained a life of its own, spreading across Canada and the US, obviously. The US totally rebranded this holiday and through capitalism sold the idea back to its original nations that have inspired it, which is actually funny, right? How things have turned when you consume something another nation has created, supposedly, but it was actually brought to that nation by your own ancestors, and now you have to pay for it. Capitalism is horrible. There's no dispute, obviously, but well played. Again, wow, how the fuck did we get here? Anyway, by the 21st century, the great majority of the Western world, and even beyond, embraced Halloween. And it won't stop. The capitalism behind this modern Halloween already adopted other traditions, which further instigates its development and evolution, more recently even adopting the sugar skulls of Dia de los Muertos, right? So who knows what else will be added? Well, I think as long as this celebration brings people together in a respectful manner aimed at celebrating life, I think it may be a good thing, provided that people shift their focus away from massive consumption of products and focus a lot more on the ancient essence of it, which is the celebration of life as a revolutionary expression against death. Well, my dear friends, I do hope you have enjoyed today's video. May this be a very wonderful spooky season to you. Be safe out there, and hopefully you will find the time to celebrate life. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, thank you for today. Until we meet again, my dear friends.